Welcome, everyone. As Patsy said, this is webinar 4. Our focus is on teaching vocabulary across NRS levels. If this is your first time here, I am the Atlas consultant. I retired in July, so my role has changed. I've also had the privilege of being a reading skills tutor for several elementary students, and it's been so much fun to be able to put EBRI in practice. Even though they're children, I am finding that the practices I've been talking about for so many years really work. Kristine Kelly is joining me. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello, I am sorry for the boring backdrop. I am still in Seattle. I was here for the COAB conference, which ended Wednesday. And I, of course, had the privilege of working with Marn for many years on STAR and EBRI. And pre-COVID, she was right down the hall from me, which I do miss. And I'm really happy to be here with her today to talk about teaching vocabulary.
Kristine and I are going to run this one a little differently. We'll both have our cameras on, and it will be kind of a tag team presentation where we take leadership of certain slides, but then we can put in our 2 cents whenever the need or the desire arises. Just a reminder that there are 2 more webinars in the near future. Webinar 5 is focused on fluency skills across NRS levels and 6 comprehension skills across NRS levels. Rob Podlasek will join me at the end of the month and Penny Brown near the end of May. A really important feature of this series is a participant folder. Kristine will put the link in the chat box. This participant folder has been growing over the 4 webinars. So before each, I upload documents that are relevant to the topics of the webinar. So looking at what's been placed this week, the word meaning test, which I'll talk about soon, several PDFs from past STAR EBRI teachers about challenges, solutions, and best practices, and also a very robust collection of teacher recommended resources. And I'll pull that up to show you towards the end. Literally, for vocabulary, you do not have to create your own curriculum. There is so much out there, most of it free for you to try. Specifically, our topics over the next hour and a half will be to briefly talk about a test that you can use to assess students' word meaning skills. Several years ago in Minnesota STAR EBRI programs, the decision was made to assume vocabulary needs rather than assess. And that was based on over 100 observations where the vast majority of students needed vocabulary. So as a time saver, we gave programs and teachers the choice to assume rather than assess. But there is a tool out there that is easy to use, and it was requested at webinar 2 when I didn't have time to go over it, that I bring it back before we talk about teaching. We'll also do a review of the evidence, the reasons why you should consider teaching vocabulary if you aren't already. We'll talk about routines, starting with ideal and then offering real across levels. And then, like I said, I'll pull up that resource chart and give you a chance to browse that. I would like to hear from you. So throughout this webinar, there'll be a few chat calls where I ask you to answer a question in the chat box. So the question now, after we've told you what we plan to do, is what do you want to learn about vocabulary instruction. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. I see fresh ideas, new strategies, routines, assess. Routines again, best practices. Applying new vocabulary in reading passages. Word stems versus words. More about resources. What students can absorb at one time. And addressing challenges.
I think we're going to be able to address quite a few of these today.
I agree. And if we aren't, then be sure to post a question or raise your hand and ask the question, and we'll try to answer it. The name of the test is the word meaning test, and it's public domain, and it is in the participant folder. It's an oral vocabulary test for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's been proven to be more effective when determining vocabulary knowledge of adults. It also takes away any reading difficulties that a student might have with a written test. The process is that you start 1 to 2 levels below the Tabor-Casas reading grade equivalent. There are 8 tests, levels 1 to 8, and for each level, there are 5 words. Like any assessment, you'll want to explain why you're doing this to ease perhaps some of the nervousness or discomfort with being tested. This is some simple language. For this test, I will ask you to give me the meanings of words. I will listen and write on another form. I will stop when it gets too hard. Your answers will tell me what I need to teach to you about vocabulary. A key practice of this test is to never show the student the test words, because then that brings the reading into it, and we want it to be an oral test. It's also quite scripted. So the first prompt is tell me what blank means. And if they're struggling with that, you can say, tell me more. They may give you a sentence, and that is considered acceptable. As you're listening to their answer to tell me more, you will score 1 for correct and 0 for incorrect, or if they don't know, which can happen. You can accept word meanings, examples, or sentences that show familiarity with the word. It does not have to be a dictionary quality definition. It could sometimes even be a rambler or some gestures, but the key is that it shows they're familiar with that word in at least one context. If they get 4 or 5 correct, you go up to the next level. If they get 3 or less correct, you go down. Your goal is to determine a vocabulary mastery level, which is the highest level word list read with 4 to 5 acceptable answers. That's where they know vocabulary well. So for instruction, you would add 1, and that becomes the vocabulary mastery level. Here's a sample of what those word lists look like. So looking down at level 1, we have home, train, confuse, start, and climb. And then they progressively get a little more difficult or complicated, which is why you stop when it gets too hard for them. Kristine, did you want to add anything about your experience conducting the word meaning test?
I would say that that again, and as you get used to giving the test, you can, as Marn said, the student can tell you in their own words what a word means, use it in a sentence, give an example. But also I found that with some words, students sometimes pantomime. And that can be helpful as well. You kind of, you get to the point where as the teacher, you're like, yeah, I really feel like you know what the word means. I can give you an example. And it's not with a word like, say a word was connect or touch or something. And what happens is many times our students will say, I know what it means, but I don't know how to explain it. And so they might pantomime, or they might, you know, reach out. And so you're looking, it's pretty concrete if they know the word or they don't. But yes, sometimes they will actually also use some gesturing, some pantomiming, which is great, and it's very useful.
And I think if you use this test, you will find there are certain words few students know. So there becomes some pattern to it the more that you conduct it. The first source of evidence is this book again, which I used at webinar 3. And I'm going to read these excerpts to you. I think because I want the words to hit you so that you understand how important vocabulary is. Vocabulary knowledge is a primary predictor of reading success. It is associated or interrelated, to refer back to webinar 1, with word identification skills at the end of 1st grade and reading comprehension in 11th grade. When I think back to webinar 1 and we talked about the interrelationships between the 4 components, this reminded me of the interrelationship between vocabulary and alphabetics and vocabulary and comprehension. Vocabulary knowledge also tends to grow with reading experience. As readers progress, lexical analysis or morphological awareness, including prefixes, roots, and suffixes, becomes increasingly important for comprehending complex and unfamiliar words and concepts. And this, I think, refers back to webinar 3 on alphabetics, that knowing morphemes, which carry meaning, is a huge benefit for reading, recognizing, and understanding more academic words. Your tier 2 and tier 3 words, as we'll find about soon. Kristine will take us through the evidence from CCRS ELA.
Vocabulary is very, very dominant in the ELA reading anchors, dominant across ELA, I would say, in general. And these are 2 core reading anchors from the College and Career Readiness Standards that really call out vocabulary. As far as anchor 4, I like to look at as the nuance anchor, because it really focuses on learners being able to determine kind of those nuances in meaning, not only the technical and concrete, but those connotative meanings and the figurative meanings, you know, some of those literary devices, and really look at why the writer is the craft, why the writer is making choices to use certain words and how that impacts the message or the tone. And then anchor 6 is about acquiring and being able to use academic and domain specific words and phrases. The goal being that students can learn them sufficiently, these academic words, to be able to really learn from more difficult text, and if they're on, to improve their understanding of text that they will interact with in college, in everyday citizenship, in the workplace, and also that they learn independent skills for actually gathering that. So some of those word attack, word study skills that they can, beyond just the dictionary, that can help them with words in the future. The language anchors also call out vocabulary several times, but because, but we're focusing here on the reading. And one of the things I found is, really, in order to do the work of the standards, a lot of the words we're talking about, the academic words, are part of directions. They're part of the questions that students are asked about text. That, if we want students to determine what tone a passage has, tone, determine, these are key words. So in order for our students to do a lot of the work of the standards, they need to understand these general academic words to be able to do the processes of the standards. And here's a little bit more from Beck, McKeown, and I always mess this up. Marn, is it Kucart or Kucart?
McKeown.
So I was wrong across the board. One of the exciting things, and I've been sharing with Marn as I've been working on looking at the reading writing connection, is as I'm diving into some of the key documents of research that Beck and McKeown are coming up. And that's really exciting to me because it tells me that the research we're talking about is really a solid foundational base. And a couple things here: that there is a long history demonstrating a strong correlational relationship between vocabulary knowledge and reading comprehension. So again, vocabulary is very, very, very key. And the second quote cited here from research is something that we are definitely going to be talking about more today, that when we talk about instruction that succeeded in affecting comprehension, included 3 features: more than several exposures to each words, both definitional and contextual information, and engagement of students in active or deep processing. And we'll talk, as you said, you want to know more about routines and how to make words stick, and how to introduce words. As Marn said, there is already so much great content out there that you don't have to reinvent the wheel to do these things.
I question whether to have this slide in the deck or not. It seemed repetitious, but I kept it because the first quote reinforces what we said earlier, and the second quote will reinforce what we talk about in the future. If you're interested in this book, this is what it looks like. And it is a follow-up to their work from 2002, focused on questions and answers that arose from that earlier book.
So we talk about words in tiers, and if you've been, I think we've referred to that now for a while, for several years. So you may have been part of webinars or sessions and conferences where we've referred to, or someone has referred to, the 3 tiers of words. And we're just going to quickly look at those. Tier 1 words are those really concrete or basic words. They're in spoken language. They're in simple texts. They're those words that that students learn early on because there's such high frequency of them. Native English speakers are exposed to those words from a very young age and are mostly familiar with those words. English learners may be familiar with these words, these kind of everyday words like table and bed and bus. They may not have any ability to read them in print, but they may know them in their own language. So again, those are the tier 1. We're talking about some of those sight words, fry words, Dolch words, general service list words. Tier 2. So these are the ones that hold things together, but they tend to be more abstract. They're academic. They are used frequently in written language or in higher level text. And they don't often have context clues, which makes them more difficult for students. Native English speakers and non-native English speakers are less likely to learn these words independently, which makes these key for teaching through explicit instruction. And then tier 3 words are those content specific words in areas such as math, science, social studies, or other subject or domain materials. They're often defined in the text. They're often bold-faced, or the definitions are given in a glossary or in the margins. And they're best taught within specialized content. So these are words like polynomial, immigration, photosynthesis, and also within career pathways, for example, if we're doing CNA or pre-CNA career pathway work, students are learning that's contextualized the terminology that they're learning for that career pathway. And it's much more successful to teach it that way in a contextualized manner.
I'm going to present 4 words, and I want you to think about which tier they fall into. You don't have to put anything in the chat box, just think about it, and then I'll tell you the right answer. But think about the word distribute. And if you decided tier 2, you are correct. And this is a word that appears across contexts. I think that's another key feature of tier 2 words, right, Kristine, is that they generally appear across contexts. So like in your classroom, you distribute papers and pencils. If you go to a restaurant, the host distributes a menu. So in multiple contexts, the use of distribute would be common.
Yeah, I like to think of these words. They often, if you ever have students who say, well, I read the passage on the test, on the GED or the TABE or the CASAS, but I wasn't sure what the question was about. A lot of times these words, like if the student generally understands the passage, but doesn't understand what it is asking, if it says, what does the writer imply, then yeah. And that could be asked about any content area.
Next word is window. And I thought of that word because I'm looking out the window right now. And if you thought tier 1, you are correct. Very common word, basic, used every day, concrete. You can see, touch, feel a window. Autobiographical is the 3rd word. And if you thought tier 3, you are correct. Kristine, am I correct in mentioning that many of the tier 3 words have Greek forms in them?
Yes.
Like auto, bio, graph. Those are all Greek forms, in addition to the suffixes at the end.
Yes, tier 2 words tend to be the ones more derived from Latin, and tier 3 words
Yes.
are the Greek. And that's what we'll talk a little bit, as Marn mentioned earlier, and a little bit about morphemes and the power of them in helping students with words.
In the tier 1 words, their origin is more from the Anglo-Saxon language, which was very basic because their life was very basic. So the words that they needed tend to be concrete words. And then when things improved educationally, and unfortunately, when there were invasions across Europe, then that's when other words came into English. Fourth word is computer. And I'm thinking this is now a tier 1 word. At one point, it was probably a tier 3 because it was within the science community, but now it is across the world. So I think it shifted from being a tier 3 specialized word to an everyday word.
And I think that highlights that there are some words that can move around and that it isn't always hard and fast. There are words, for example, that are tier 1 words. One that I always have to work on with students is the word table, because table certainly is a tier 1 word if we define it as, you know, something that you eat at or something that you place something on. But it can also show up as a tier 2 word if we're using it in such as a table of data, or to table a discussion until later. So sometimes they move around a little bit, and that's okay when you find, especially some of those multi-meaning words.
So they're not based on length. The tiers are not based on length, but rather utility. Where are they used most? I thought I had a chat in there. Not sure what happened to it, a chat call. I'll ask it rather than work from the slide. My question was, thinking about your own students, what is their primary tier need? Is it tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or a combination? So I'll quickly just put the answer to that question in the chat.
So what do you think your primary needs are for your students? Those tier 1, those tier 2, kind of academic, or the tier 3?
Okay, I see quite a few combinations. Tier 2.
I'm seeing a lot of 1 and 2, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very accurate
Mm-hmm.
in most cases, with
Yeah.
lower levels.
Right. I don't think it's, learn all the tier 1 and you're ready for tier 2. You learn all the tier 2 and you're ready for tier 3, because it's really context-based as to what you need to teach. Okay, this is a slide of what ideal vocabulary instruction looks like, the practices that are involved, and Kristine will walk us through that.
So again, these are ideal. We of course are coming out of a time when things weren't so ideal, and many of us were working on teaching vocabulary virtually, or in some cases through packet-based instruction, depending on what we were able to provide our students. But ideally, there is a routine, and this is definitely an area for routine. And students do not get bored of this routine. I can say that from doing it for a long time. So 3 to 8 words are selected from leveled texts, or they're presented from lists. And we're talking about short lessons. I think that in the beginning, many of us just kind of rolled and taught, oh, we just did an hour and a half of vocabulary because it's fun to teach, and students love learning vocabulary. They see the immediate relevance. But shorter lessons actually can be more effective. So breadth and depth, it's not obviously just about the number of words, but also that we go deep and that students know. We want students to know how to use words in multiple contexts. So we want to dig in. And so sometimes you feel like I should be teaching many more words, but you want to teach them at a speed where students are actually getting down deep with those words as well. And using explicit instruction. So we definitely want to give explanation. I would, over and over would tell students why we were doing it this way with these words. But really providing the definition for students and giving them some of that initial information, using modeling, guided practice, different activities that increase in complexity, and applying those taught words to short or longer texts and recycling consistently to keep those words coming through.
And depending on how many words you pick and how many times you offer vocabulary instruction, this will cover multiple lessons. So it's not a done deal in a week. It might take 2 weeks to really learn those words deeply. Sometimes teachers worked with a set for a month. Yeah. Because they only met once a week, or they only had time to teach vocabulary once a week. So it's important that it's not only regular, but it's as frequent as possible, and it extends over time.
I can say that I started with 10 words a week and quickly changed to 5. Because I had students 2 times a week for an hour STAR class each time. And then I still was seeing a lot of uncertainty about words. So I put it back to the students, and the students decided on 3. They felt like 3 a week, and just constantly, recycling and working through the routine was something manageable, where they were actually learning and feeling comfortable with the words. But it will be it'll be up to your context, how much time you have a week.
Right. And feel free to make adjustments. I teach tier 2 words to a 5th grader, and I've always chosen 8. And now I'm thinking 8 is too many, and I need to cut back so that we can get deeper into those words rather than focus on all 8 twice a week, just 5, and he will learn them well. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself if you're wanting to select words from text. The first is, which content-specific words in the audio, video, print text are important for students to know? So this can be from early ESL levels all the way through advanced. Important meaning they would lose meaning of the text if they don't know these words. And since you know them, this would also contribute to your selection. The second question is, which content-specific words appear frequently, meaning more than once in the text? Because again, if a word is used 3 times, 4 times, and a student doesn't know it, they're going to quickly lose meaning of that text. 3 is, what other important words should students know? For example, time order words, prepositions, conjunctions, test terms. So you might incorporate one of those in your set, or just take a break sometime and teach those types of words separately. And the fourth question is, which words have been identified as high frequency in spoken or written English and should be recognized quickly? And we have 4 lists that we'll share soon, where the work again has been done for you, where there are high frequency word lists across levels.
And can I say something quickly, Marn? I think that it's important that we teach, and I've done this with my own students, the concept of frequency words. Many times our students, particularly my ELs, will want to make note of every word they don't know and, and look it up. And it's not a very efficient way to learn vocabulary. And there's a lot of time that can be spent on words that aren't really going to pay off. They're words that just are not going to appear perhaps ever again for our students. And so I talked to them about how if we focus together on some of those kind of high utility, high frequency words, and they also learn some good word attack skills as far as understanding word parts, word families, some of those pieces, context, that is really more powerful than having all kinds of words, written down that they may never actually use or see.
And I think there's a natural blend between alphabetics and vocabulary instruction, especially for tier 2 and tier 3 words, where helping them with pronunciation means they need to know those parts. Helping them with meaning also assists in meaning, understanding meaning. This is an excerpt from ReadWorks called Taking Photos at a very early level, about kindergarten level. What I've done as an example is I did a count of words that are used more than once. So photos is used 10 times, and that doesn't include photos in the title. Camera is used twice, people twice, different twice, and colors twice. So this alone might guide you in which words to teach for this text, or at least it's a starting point. And then you can choose other words that you think are more essential that your students don't know. This is a practice for the text or the passage, What's Up in Space from ReadWorks. It's an excerpt at about 3rd grade level. So I want you to read over this and either mentally or on paper, pick the words that you would teach, you would pre-teach your students in order to optimize their comprehension. And I'll give you a few minutes to do that.
And Keith, we see your question. Just stay tuned. Good question.
I will go back to the passage, but as you work through it, I'd like you to start putting into the chat box which words you consider key to understanding what's up in space. I see solar system, space, star, planet. You seem to be in agreement as to what those keywords are. Earth, made of. That's very interesting. Sun, it's a new one. Travel around.
Yeah, the made of or made up of. You start getting into those well, they are phrasal verbs, and they're they're also a kind of collocation because we often see that combination made up of. So yeah, that might be a good
Center around. Okay, thank you. That's great. And there was a question at the very top, right, Kristine?
Yep, there was a question. Keith had asked if it was appropriate to ask students what words they don't know in a passage like this. So I know many times teachers will have students maybe skim over a passage initially and then maybe call out words that they don't know just from a skim through. So what would you say? Is it appropriate to ask students to do that?
Are you asking me? I think so. Although I think the final call is the teachers as to which words will give the biggest bang for their buck. But I think it's considerate to ask students which words they don't know. But it depends on the length of the passage too, because if they have to peruse a long passage, I would think they might get buried in the number of words they don't know. So perhaps for a shorter passage, this would be more appropriate. What do you say, Kristine?
Yeah, I think it's good. And I think that we don't ever want to communicate to students that we don't want them to, independently, look up words and find out what words mean. We're just thinking of how we can most efficiently use the time we have together. And I think that where things can maybe go off the road a little bit is if we ask students what words they don't know and then focus all of our instruction around those words, because those may not be the words, or there may be some students who are very familiar with those words. I find that when we focus on the academic words, most of the time the students don't know, or they think they know what those words mean, or they may know them in one way, but it just seems that that's just an area where everyone can really participate. So I think it's always good to ask them because we want to keep that curiosity there. But some of those words may in fact be ones that we've also targeted, but then we also want to make sure as the teachers that we steer them in a direction that we feel they need to go.
I think you could also, if this is a change in your approach to teaching vocabulary, you could explain it before you start pre-selecting the words, is that you're going to do things differently. You'll still want to know what words they don't know, but they might be put off for a bit so that you can focus on what you have selected. So kind of a parking lot concept where if they share the other words they don't know, you put it in a parking lot and you'll go back to it. But the focus of your lesson will be on those 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words that you've pre-selected.
And then you can always tell them, what a word means. I do that frequently. If we're reading something together aloud and we come upon a word that I know students likely don't know, but it's not one of the target words, I say, this is what it means.
Yeah.
And then we just move on.
Right. And keep it brief. So that's all you need to give them is a brief definition, and then you can again focus on those pre-selected words. Okay, here's a final word or phrase, ball of gas. Also a good one.
And that's a great example of a word with multiple meanings. I mean, we have the ball, the throw a ball, we have a ball of gas, and then think about the phrase to have a ball, right? And so, you know, that is a word that would be kind of fun to work with because there are, you know, different ways that we use them and pretty frequently.
And I think your contributions in the chat box really demonstrate how well you know your students. I mean, I was, of course, picking space, system, and you came up with some great phrases that would throw a reader off as much as those scientific words. Okay, well, thank you for being with us the first half. We're going to take a 5-minute stretch break, and then we'll come back to talk more about teaching, the routines for teaching across the tiers. Welcome back, everyone. This is a chart of those high frequency word lists, and I'll walk you through them from left to right. The first one, the new Dolch list, I find very exciting. The original Dolch list was created in the 1950s. And it was solely focused on those words that appear frequently in children's literature. And it was only 220 words. If you're like me, I probably learned those Dolch words way back when. The newest version from 2020 took into consideration that children don't just learn words from text, from books, but they also learn them from audios, videos, and songs. So that upped the list to 875, and I think makes it much more relevant. The asterisk means it's available at the link at the top. And Kristine, you'll put that into the chat box, right? The second list, Fry's Instant Words, is available at the link below. So is the older Dolch list available from that website. Hopefully they'll update to the new. The last update for Fry's list was in 1993. Dr. Fry originally intended to expand the Dolch list with his own word lists. So what he did is he came up with 100 words for each grade level of high frequency usage for a total of 1,000 words. The first 300 Fry words comprise 60% of words used in easy reading texts. So that's a crucial list, the 1 to 300. Teachers I worked with a couple of years ago felt that the words selected at like grade equivalent 7 to 12, not all of them were as relevant as they might have been in the 1990s. The new general service list was updated in 2013. And this was done by a group of academics in England. And they looked at the words used frequently in both spoken and written everyday English. And they came up with 2,801 headwords. And those headwords are just the beginning of a word. So they don't take into account perhaps the other forms. And you'll notice that is the biggest number across all 4 word lists, because most of our language is at an everyday level. The new academic word list was also updated in 2013. And this looks at words used or utilized frequently in academic English, more from written than spoken. And there are 963 headwords, again, just one word that may have various forms. So if you want to take a look at these lists, they are readily available. Again, it's a tool for helping you to select which words to teach. You still need to use your teacher wisdom and your knowledge of your students to make that list most effective. Did you want to add anything, Kristine?
Nope.
There's nothing? Okay. There is also a wonderful tool from the EAT Foundation, English for Academic Purposes, which is an academic highlighter and sorter. So I took an excerpt from Developing Possible Solutions, which is at about an 8th grade level. I copied and pasted it into the text box. It just takes a few moments for the Finder to come up with words from the 10 sublists of the academic word list. I had a little more trouble using the Finder for the new, so I chose to use the former, the older. So what's in yellow have been found as an academic word. I also underlined the number of times solutions is used, again, to convince you that this is definitely not only an academic word, but a key word for students to understand. Obviously, some of these are at the later sublist. The sublists are arranged from most frequent to less frequent. So some of these are at less frequent. Most of them are at the most frequent. And so again, this gives you a starting point for which words to teach. Keep in mind, this is only an excerpt. So if you ran the entire passage through the Finder and Sorter, you would have so many words to pick from. So you're really going to have to use your discretion, but it does give you a starting point. Kristine is going to walk us through the routines for teaching Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. I'm hoping after she goes over Tier 1 that you'll be able to contribute some of your own ideas that have been effective in your classroom.
I was really excited to see the number of people who put in the chat box that they feel that they're teaching a mix of Tier 1 and Tier 2 words. And what's key is that we are exposing our students even at low levels conversationally to some of these words. And recently I kind of looked through a series of beginner ESL text or textbooks like Ventures or the Future series or the Standout series.
Sorry.
That's okay. And looking at the beginner level. And I started noticing words that were appearing in the directions or in the activities. And some of those words were define and category and predict and pattern and meaning and evidence. And these are words where at low levels, we aren't necessarily going to be explicitly teaching them and taking students through a whole routine, but we certainly can be exposing them to these words in conversation, in oral direction, and also in text where there is oral support or the teacher support. So when we talk about these a Tier 1 routine, we are talking about providing a balance of language and literacy instruction. We want to expose students, our learners, to new words from conversation, some explanation, interaction, and very basic texts. So again, the number of words that you select are going to depend on how often you're teaching the students, what level you're teaching the students, maybe even how many. The larger the class I find, the fewer words, because I want everyone to have opportunities to really engage with those words. But these words are text related or commonly confused for students to see, hear, say, discuss, and even possibly spell at these levels. The teacher can assign print and or online activities for taught vocabulary words and application to sentences or basic text. One of the things that I really did like about mixing instruction during COVID is we would have synchronous class where I would introduce the words and we would do some activities, and then asynchronously I would set up some activities for students to do. So they actually got more intense level of vocabulary instruction. So again, this is for ESL levels 1 through 3 or ABE levels 1 and 2. We're talking a lot about conversation, orally exposing students, and kind of working the tier 1 words, yes, but starting to feed in those tier 2 words, because those words start to appear very, very quickly for even beginner levels.
So if you teach these levels and you've got some tried and true strategies, would you put those in the chat box so that we can all know about them?
And as you're thinking, and please, adding some things that you do instructionally, there is a question here. Should we not anchor words to teach to the main idea? I would say, yes, that is an important thing to consider in the case of the passage about space, for example. You know, space showed up and some of those key words. In fact, sometimes I will limit like pre-teaching to 2 or 3 words that are really key to the gist or what I want students to really come out with, so that they're not initially blocking students completely. And then I will save other words that perhaps have context clues or aren't as key for other types of activities. So I would say yes. Marn, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Perhaps that example of the finder and sorter was confusing because it presented so many words without recognition of what the focus of the text was. But yes, I mean, it's all about understanding. And so whatever gets students to that point would be a priority.
Okay, chat box people. I know you're doing great
yeah.
things out there with vocabulary. I'm gonna chalk it up to what you want to share is so much, it's taking you time to type it all and put in the box.
Danielle shares that she introduces new vocabulary with an image or has students draw a picture to help them remember the meaning. That's an excellent idea. Give them the visual that they can connect to their oral knowledge and then apply to written.
You have used images all the way up through my GED students. And one of the ways I like to use them is to introduce a word, but then just for a fun activity, I might give them, I think about where I took an image of people, 2 people shaking hands. And one of our target words that week was consensus. And so I asked them, how is this image an example of consensus? And that just, that's a really interesting, it taps in, you know, into a different part of the brain. And I think that it's kind of like drawing a picture. Boy, I tell you, I've had students tell me once I figured out how to draw that word and how to draw a picture or a symbol to represent that word, I don't think I'm going to forget what that word means.
It seems like it would really deepen knowledge of a word to have a visual. Mm-hmm. And it would be stuck in your brain and hopefully easier to retrieve.
And some students love to draw pictures of the word, and some students say, I can't draw. And then you say, it can be anything. It can be stick people. Mm-hmm. I talk about when I was teaching developmental reading at Hennepin Tech, one of the students who complained about having to draw took the word outcast, and he drew 3 stick people in one corner of the square, and then in the diagonally down in the other part of the square drew just one single stick person, and he said outcast. And I said, this is brilliant. This is just perfect. So
Yvette says that she likes to layer instruction with suprasegmentals syllables for repetition. That definitely sounds like an ESL strategy. Carrie mentions using context clues from the sentence, Google Images, asking yes, no questions, and then using the new word. Yeah, I had my 5th grader write some of the words in sentences, and it's a struggle for him. But after we work through the sentence, I really feel he does have a more personal attachment to that word. Keith mentions writing a short explanation on the board, and then students copy that. And he uses symbols, opposites, antonyms.
I think about, we talk about using, and some of you may use graphic organizers for a couple of these real key words. And we worked in STAR with quadrant charts and this idea of going through very explicitly and giving them a solid definition, and then maybe taking a look, as I see some of the opposites and synonyms, maybe having a place for a visual. And then maybe giving them, I've seen some teachers create a good sentence using that word. And then I've seen them as a class create an additional sentence or two, like collaboratively, to go with that word.
And it really helps if you're using sentence creation to give a sentence yourself to get them started.
Yes.
I read someplace, don't quote me, that antonyms are maybe more effective than synonyms, because sometimes synonyms can just be more words they may not know or muddle the word you're trying to teach, whereas an antonym kind of has a shock value to it if they know the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Thank you. Those were excellent. We're going to move into the tier 2 routine, which is quite lengthy, and it's based on the STAR routine. Again, if it seems like too much, there is curriculum out there that follows this routine for 2 to 5 words. So you don't have to create the curriculum to use these practices.
So a tier 2 routine, and right before I start, I do want to acknowledge Keith did say that he read someplace that the idea of teaching opposites is founded in brain-based learning. I too remember reading something about antonyms being a bit more effective, and we have here word families, verbs, nouns, adjectives. Yeah, the part of speech. That's something you can also include in your initial explanation and teaching of the word. So tier 2, as Marn said, it can seem very lengthy, but you certainly want to do it across time. And when it comes to there are a multitude of activities you can do. As you kind of give them more complex activities to use the word. I don't use them all the time. So you kind of have to find your sweet spot. But again, you select the number of words you've determined to be the most effective number of words to teach over the week or over 2 weeks. I've done it both when I've had students 3 times a week and also 2 times a week. And as a teacher, you model how to pronounce each new academic word. You might work with syllabication and supporting their ability to kind of break up the word. Students repeat can talk about the part of speech, a simple meaning, examples. It's important that we provide our own examples and multiple examples. And again, this is something you can have students, recording on a graphic organizer. And then we want to ask for student sharing of other examples. So if the word is, I'm trying to think, and I always blank because there are so many words, but say I go back to consensus and I say, oh, my husband and I didn't know where we wanted to travel. But after we looked at 2 or 3 places, we finally came to a consensus about where we're going to go. And then saying, when was a time where you and a friend or a family member had to come to a consensus or agree about something. And then, connecting immediately to their own lives, their own context is important. I give them sentence stems or frames. I support them in all the ways I possibly can. But again, students can be working and filling in that word chart or that map. And of course you want to be selective and have them do just a couple, maybe 1 or 2 at a time, because filling out 8 word charts or maps is a lot. Next slide.
These steps are scaffolding in 2 ways. They're scaffolding from modeling to guided practice, and they're also scaffolding from oral to written. So the first part of this routine is basically conversation about words. So you're posting the words or they're seeing them if you're using a workbook, but you're talking about them before you have them start writing.
Mm-hmm. And as they're listening to each other, they're being exposed over and over to the word, just simply orally and just with that listening piece. And I always ask students to listen for something that they find particularly interesting or that they hadn't considered, to give them an intentional listening activity. And then when we go through orally using the word for that first time, I give them a sentence stem that says, something I heard that was interesting was, I like to do that as well. So when you start having them do some written activities, matching is a great place to start. Just matching the word with the definition, fill in the blank activities that students complete, and the teacher and the students check. So right now you're giving them a lot of support in matching the definition or in filling the blank. I always start with 1 fill in the blank, but then I might expand to, as we go along, to sentences where they have to fill in 2 blanks with words, which, ups the complexity. You move into more complex open activities. And again, you wouldn't do this all in 1 class session, right? You would do it over a week, or you would do it over a few weeks, where students can actually do some writing with sentence completion. And to go back to consensus, they might build on a time. My students, I would do something like a time that my team at work had to come to a consensus about something, or I might give them a few options if they're not all working a job, but then they're going to have to actually start to do some writing. Multiple choice. You might have them do multiple choice where they're picking out the antonym, or they're picking out a phrase that means about the same, or something where I've seen it done. How I would say the word is clarify for an academic word. How would a teacher clarify an idea to a student? And maybe give them 3 examples, and one of them is a clear example of the teacher helping to make something clear to a student. Sentence creation. See, they're adding more and more of their own context, and we're kind of letting them off more and more in the guided practice, moving more towards independent practice of the words. And noting the usage of the words that they're learning in other contexts. Students would come into me and they'd say, Sarah, in science, oh my gosh, she used one of our words. But where it really comes out is students will come in and say, I was watching TV. And I heard this word. I had a student once come in and she said, I was watching CSI and I think I heard 7 of our words, or on the radio, right? Or they start to see them, and it's wonderful. We want to encourage students to come in and say, this is, I saw that word and this is where I saw it. And they will begin to notice them a lot more.
When I was doing STAR teacher observations, I think nearly 100% of the time I observed vocabulary. So I didn't expect to see all 4 components, but rather what they regularly taught the day I was there. So it was usually vocabulary, and it was uncanny how many times within 24 hours I heard or read one of the words the teacher taught during the lesson. I think it happened every time, and we're talking hundreds of observations.
Mm-hmm. I would also come in if I was driving to work. There were many times where I was maybe listening to NPR on the way into work, and then I would come in and we'd start class and I'd say, everybody, they use this word that we just were talking about. And I would tell them, the context, and I would say, see, I mean, these are really useful words, and it gets students excited and seeing how important these words are that we're focusing in on. Read and respond is not something that I did every time, but I would often do it when I was recycling words. And the beauty of read and respond is it's an answer to the question, how do I find text that uses the target words? And you don't have to search endlessly to find a text that uses the words that you want students to practice. They can practice with virtually any text. And so you can give them an excerpt. It can be a News ELA article or ReadWorks. You can grab an excerpt off a blog. It could be usually I use something very, very short, like a paragraph or 2 or maybe 3 paragraphs. And the questions that you ask them about the text use the word. So the word doesn't necessarily appear, but you might say you were working on the word infer and imply, for example. And so reading a passage and then asking a question like, what does the writer want us to infer? And again, it's practicing that word, and you can create so many different types of questions that are comprehension questions about any text. You're just using the words rather than looking for text specifically, because you're not going to find a text that has all 3 or 5 or 8 of the words, right? This was probably one of the greatest things that I learned.
You don't have to, yeah.
And yes, no, why, or true, false, why. This is a lot of fun. And I would get students sometimes in pairs where they would have a chance to orally discuss why they decided yes, no, or why they decided true, false before volunteering to talk to the class, or I would have them talk about it orally with a partner before I had them do some writing. The key is to use the word, or sometimes 2 words, in a statement. And students have to decide, do they think that the statement is true or false, or do they agree yes? If it's a question, they have the answer yes or no. And there are no right answers. The key is why. And the key is that students use the words and really start to dive deep into explaining their whys. There's so much learning that happens for that student and for other students who hear the explanation. So examples, taking time to reflect on mistakes is helpful. Well, you might have a student who says, yes. You ask, well, why? Well, because then you might learn how to do something better the next time. But then you might have another student who says, no, because if you reflect on your mistakes, it's going to make you feel really sad and stressed out. Both answers are fine, but it is in that the why, the explanation of the why, that is I've had very, very lively discussions with this activity.
So this scaffold
activity too.
This scaffold is obviously from guided practice to application, application to text. because that's what it's all about, is being able to read and recognize words in context.
And finally, for advanced ESL, and if you're looking at ABE 4 through 6, and one key piece to know, and this is for many, many years of teaching that GED level, those students who come in on a 9th through 12th grade on a TABE or a CASA silent comprehension test, most of them have a need for academic vocabulary. And I will show them lists of what we're talking about in STAR class, or just a list of academic vocabulary, and they'll say, wow, I don't know a lot of those words. So don't assume that because students have a higher reading levels that they don't need work. So you can scan a text, you can select a set of content specific words. So those domain specific words, the tier 3 words, if you are focusing there. Model pronunciation, again, same thing. Syllabication, morphology is really important here, especially for students who plan to go ahead into school. It is a key part of learning content, is understanding some of that morphology. Repeating pronunciation, using images, telling a definition. And one optional step is that teachers and students can read an easier text or watch a video that uses the same or similarly taught words. And then teachers and students can read the original text, connect the taught words to the specific content or theme. So it's a little different with tier 3 words. I know that we're starting to talk about doing more work in Minnesota with advanced readers. And I'm hoping that we can gather some great strategies that people are already using and provide some good strategies for these higher levels and kind of those tier 3 words. Marn, anything to add?
No, I think, generally if you're teaching a science, social studies, literature context, there's suggested words that might fall into the tier 3 box. But you don't necessarily have to teach those. Again, they are a starting point, but you know your students better than the publishers. And so picking some, but not all, would be my recommendation. I want to assure you again, you don't have to recreate any wheels. Here's a short summary of what's available on the Atlas website. There's vocabulary workouts, which are very effective in one-room schoolhouses, where you don't have a lot of time to work with students and you may not see them regularly over time. So these are one-pagers that are focused on just 1 to 2 related academic words, and they scaffold from oral to written. Then there are vocabulary units, which were adopted by Minnesota STAR program. Originally, this set of units from Illinois was based on 10 words, and they reduced it to 5 words. So there are still 16 units, but each unit has 2 lessons with just 5 words. And then there are vocabulary lessons, which originally came out of Appalachian State University. And these are 38 lessons, so a whole year's worth, doing it once a week, which we know this might be 2 years worth, focused on 5 academic words. And it's also available on Quizlet. Kristine, you probably know more about that.
Yeah, the lessons now have Quizlets that go with them. So if you've ever used Quizlet, if you haven't, it's very easy to use. It's very easy for students to learn how to use. So the word decks have been created and students can independently go through just flashcards, like virtual flashcards, for definition in word. There's spelling tests where they have to hear and write the word. There's all kinds of little games that they can play, and that's been created already. The work's already been done.
And didn't they make it either a Word or a Google Doc so that teachers could revise? the
Yes, I believe
lessons?
all of these are either a Word or Google Doc. So you can go in and you can make decisions about what you want to give students and when, or you can even add additional
Mhm.
practice.
I think originally you couldn't, so that's a huge improvement. This is what the chart of recommended resources looks like. So we talked about alphabetics at webinar 3. So here are all the recommended resources for vocabulary, and they're hyperlinked. So from this document, you can go directly to the curriculum or the website or the publisher's website if they need to be purchased. So we've got the ones I just described in the top box. And then websites that are open or free with sign up. And then all of those word lists. And then a set of subscription or print to purchase. When we first started in STAR, there was nada. So teachers were needing to create their own curriculum. And then the second year, we stumbled across Words to Learn By, which was like a godsend for us because it followed the STAR model for teaching tier words exactly, and everything was there. And so that became very popular across STAR programs, and there are 3 different levels. It also ended with a text that used the words that were taught.
Yes, I remember not having anything the first year that I taught STAR, which is why I'm sitting on about 100 self-made units myself because we didn't have any. So these are wonderful, and they will give you so much to use.
Yeah, it's almost hard to believe how much has happened over the years with evidence-based reading instructional materials. Okay, we're at closing time, but if you can stick around for a little bit longer, we would like to know what routines, ideas, or resources will be most useful to you as you move forward. So if you can do that, we'll pay close attention to them. If not, thank you. And don't hesitate to email me with any questions through the series, which will end on May 20th. Thanks again.
And you can certainly email me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to share in the last chat call, it would be appreciated.
Thanks, everybody. It was great to see everybody today.
Yes,
Not
thank you.
everybody, but read
on
everybody.
Too chilly mid-April day. Okay, I see appreciation for the resource chart. Yay. Okay, someone's already using the lessons.